When a narcissistic woman hurts you, what she hides first is not indifference, it is vulnerability. On the surface, she may appear composed, confident, even empowered by the aftermath. But this display is less a sign of strength and more a psychological defense. As Carl Jung observed, the persona is often a compensation for what the psyche fears it lacks. In this case, the performance of power exists to keep something far more fragile from being exposed. Internally, the act of hurting you creates a quiet fracture. Not because of empathy in the way we traditionally understand it, but because your pain threatens the story she tells herself about who she is. To acknowledge weakness would mean confronting shame, dependency, and an unfinished inner self. So instead, strength is exaggerated, control is dramatized, detachment is rehearsed. The illusion must be convincing because it is directed inward as much as outward. What makes this illusion so compelling is that it often worked before. You may have mistaken confidence for stability, decisiveness for self-knowledge. But psychological strength is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the capacity to face it. The narcissistic structure cannot afford this encounter. And so, the mask becomes rigid. Any crack risks collapse. This is why your reaction mattered so deeply. Your emotional engagement reinforced the illusion. When you hurt, she could still feel powerful. When you pleaded, explained, or chased clarity, the performance held. But when you begin to step back, when your attention withdraws, the illusion loses its audience. And without an audience, it cannot survive. The uncomfortable truth is this: real strength does not need to announce itself. It does not require another person's pain to exist. If there is one insight to carry forward, let it be this: do not confuse someone else's loud display of power with inner solidity. The most decisive act you can take is to stop feeding an illusion and start investing in your own wholeness. After the initial illusion of strength comes something far more destabilizing: panic. Not loud panic, not dramatic collapse, but a quiet, internal disturbance that a narcissistic woman works tirelessly to conceal. When she hurts you, especially if she senses you pulling away, what unsettles her most is not the loss of the relationship itself, but the loss of psychological control. Control, for her, is safety. It is orientation. It is how she knows who she is in relation to the world. From a Jungian perspective, control over another's emotional state functions as an extension of the ego. As Carl Jung might frame it, when the ego over-identifies with power, it becomes terrified of the unconscious forces it cannot command. Your emotional independence represents one of those forces. When you stop reacting as expected, when your pain no longer mirrors her influence, something destabilizing occurs internally. This panic rarely looks like fear. It shows up as irritation, subtle provocation, sudden coldness, or unexplained need to reassert relevance. She may replay conversations in her mind, not to understand you, but to locate where control slipped. The silence you offer becomes louder than any argument because it leaves her alone with uncertainty. And uncertainty is intolerable when one's self-worth depends on external regulation. What's important to understand is that this panic is hidden even from herself. To admit fear would be to admit dependency. So instead, it is converted into restlessness or contempt. This is why detachment is so powerful, not as punishment, but as truth. It removes you from a psychological role you were never meant to play. If there is something to take with you, it is this: the moment you stop managing someone else's emotional equilibrium, you reclaim your own. And in doing so, you step out of their control and back into your life. Another truth that is carefully hidden after she hurts you is guilt. But not in the way most people understand it. Guilt, for a narcissistic woman, is not allowed to fully form. It is detected, then immediately neutralized. This is not because she is incapable of feeling it, but because guilt threatens the very structure of her identity. To accept responsibility would mean admitting that the image she protects is flawed, and that is a psychological risk she cannot afford. From a Jungian lens, what we refuse to integrate becomes shadow. As Carl Jung explained, the ego survives by disowning aspects of the self that feel unbearable. In this case, guilt is pushed into the shadow and replaced with rationalization. The story is rewritten. You become too sensitive. The conflict becomes inevitable, and her actions become necessary. This reframing is not malicious strategy as much as it is self-preservation. Yet disowned guilt does not disappear. it leaks. It shows up as defensiveness, as subtle blame shifting, as a need to reassert moral superiority. You may notice how quickly the conversation turns away from your pain and toward her justification. This is not dialogue, it is damage control. The goal is not understanding, but relief from internal tension. What makes this dynamic particularly disorienting is that you may sense something unresolved beneath her certainty. That is because guilt, when buried rather than processed, creates pressure. It demands expression, but never in a way that leads to repair. True remorse requires vulnerability, and vulnerability would expose the fragility she works so hard to deny. For you, the danger lies in waiting for accountability that cannot arrive without self-confrontation. Closure does not come from her recognition of harm. It comes from your refusal to keep carrying that she cannot face. The insight to hold on to is simple but decisive. You are not responsible for integrating someone else's shadow. Your task is to reclaim your truth, and let that be enough. After the guilt is buried, and the panic is disguised, something else quietly returns: emptiness. This is one of the least discussed, yet most destabilizing experiences for a narcissistic woman after she has hurt you. While conflict, emotional reactions, and even suffering once provided stimulation and a sense of significance, your withdrawal creates a vacuum. And that vacuum is unbearable because it forces her to confront a self that exists without reflection. In psychological terms, narcissistic supply is not about admiration alone. It is about feeling real. Your reactions, your questions, your pain, your attempts to understand once served as proof of impact. When those reactions disappear, when silence replaces engagement, the inner world becomes disturbingly quiet. As Carl Jung would suggest, when external mirrors vanish, the psyche is left alone with its unconscious content. And if those contents have never been integrated, emptiness is what remains. This is why detachment unsettles her more than confrontation ever did. Anger still provides connection. Pain still confirms relevance. But indifference removes meaning altogether. The absence of your emotional presence does not feel like peace to her. It feels like erasure. The carefully maintained identity begins to lose definition. Beck. As it was never self-generated, you may notice attempts to provoke, to reappear, to subtly remind you of her presence. These are not gestures of reconciliation. They are attempts to escape the void. Emptiness demands self-reflection, and self-reflection threatens the illusion she depends on. For you, this moment is pivotal. It is tempting to re-engage, to offer one more explanation, one more emotional response. But doing so fills a space that was never yours to hold. The deeper truth is this: when you stop feeding what drains you, you reclaim your energy and your direction. Let the silence work. What you build in that space will matter far more than what you left behind, what unsettled. Her next is far more personal than anger or loss. It is the fear that you saw her, not the curated image, not the practiced confidence, but the unguarded moments where something inconsistent slipped through. When she hurt you, especially if you questioned her behavior or stopped accepting easy explanations, there is a hidden awareness that you may have glimpsed what she works tirelessly to conceal. And that realization lingers. From a Jungian perspective, being truly seen threatens the persona. As Carl Jung described, the persona is a social mask designed to protect the ego from exposure. But when someone gets close enough, emotional pain often becomes the moment where the mask cracks. Your hurt was not just an inconvenience, it was evidence. Evidence that her actions revealed something integrated, something unresolved. This is why, after hurting you, she may attempt to redefine how she is remembered. She may minimize what happened, distort the narrative, or subtly undermine your credibility. This is not about winning an argument. It is about reclaiming control over the image you carry of her. Because if you truly saw her and you walked away anyway, that threatens the illusion of superiority she relies on to feel stable. What she hides is the fear that you now hold a truth she cannot rewrite. And that fear persists, even in silence. It shapes how she recalls the relationship, not with warmth or regret, but with defensiveness. You become the one who misunderstood, because acknowledging that you understood too well would be intolerable. For you, this awareness is quietly liberating. You do not need to convince her of what you saw. Insight does not require agreement. When you stop explaining yourself, you protect what you've learned. The closing truth to hold on to is this: seeing clearly is not cruelty, it is awakening. And once you have seen, your responsibility is not to look back, But to move forward with honesty and self-respect, what remains hidden beneath everything else is an unspoken awareness that quietly follows her, the recognition that you may heal and she may not. This is not a conscious admission, but a deep psychological tension. When someone leaves with clarity rather than chaos, it disrupts the narrative she depends on. Your growth becomes evidence that pain did not destroy you, it transformed you. And that realization is deeply unsettling. From a Jungian standpoint, healing requires confrontation with the self. As Carl Jung emphasized, individuation is the process of integrating the unconscious, not escaping it. For a narcissistic structure, this process feels threatening. Self-reflection risks dismantling the persona, exposing dependency, shame, and emotional immaturity. So while she may sense that change is possible, the cost feels too high. Avoidance becomes easier than evolution. Your healing, however, does not require her participation, and this is where the contrast becomes unavoidable. As you begin to stabilize, regain perspective, and rebuild your identity, something shifts. You are no longer defined by reaction. You are no longer tethered to proving or explaining. In psychological terms, you step into authorship of your inner life. She notices this not with admiration, but with quiet resistance, because your wholeness removes the role she once played in shaping your emotional world. What she hides is the discomfort of this comparison. Growth highlights stagnation. Awareness exposes avoidance. And while she may dismiss your journey outwardly, inwardly it challenges the belief that control equals strength. True strength, as it turns out, is the ability to face oneself without collapsing. For you, this is the final turning point. Healing is not about winning or being understood. It is about becoming free. Let this be the reflection you carry forward when you choose self-awareness over self-betrayal. You end cycles that others are still trapped inside, and that choice, once made, changes everything.